Welcome back to the 14th video of this Java series where we're going to be focusing on array lists in Java. Now, earlier on in the series we looked at arrays, and one of the things we noticed was that we have to define the number of elements that we expect to have right at the start. So for example here, I've defined my array and I've said it's going to have 5 elements. However, we're not always going to know how many elements we need. And sometimes we may think we need 5, but then we may realize we need, say, 7 or 8. And so we don't always want to have to redefine a whole new array every time. And on the other hand, we also don't want to have to define an array with too many elements just to be safe. For example, I could easily set this one to say 9999999. This wouldn't be the most efficient way because if I was saying only using 5 spots, then it would mean that 99,994 of those spots would then get wasted, and that's a lot of wasted memory. And so this brings us on to using array lists, which are actually great for this reason. And so array lists are actually an object, and so we need to actually import our object using an import class. And so the way we do that is simply by writing import java.util, because it's a utility, and then .ArrayLists. And if we hit the semicolon, we'll have the array lists imported. Now, as you can see here, it's sort of grayed out because we don't actually use it yet. So let's have a look at how they work. Now, to define an array list, we simply write ArrayList, and then I'm going to store characters in my array list. And so we actually put in the wrapper class for a primitive data type, character. And then I'm simply just going to give it a name. So I'm going to call it mychars, using the camel casing there in the name. And then I'm going to say new array list because it's a new array list. And now notice these brackets here. We could leave them empty, or we could say choose to write a number in here, say 8. And that would, as it says here, define the initial capacity of our array list. Quite similar to how we define, the main difference being that this array list would increase in size as we need it, whilst for an array it would be fixed. And so I'm going to leave this empty for now, and let's look at how we would add elements into our array. And so this isn't too bad. All we simply do is write mychars dot, and then we use one of the helper methods that we have here, and we can use add. And then because we're storing characters, I'll put a character in between apostrophes. And remember, we use the apostrophe just so Java knows that we're not referring to the variable a. And then I'm going to go ahead and do that again. So mychars.add, and this time I'll add an e. And then I'm going to go ahead and add an o. And so we should understand that the numbering in an array list works in the exact same way as an array. And what I mean by that is we start from 0 instead of counting from 1. So, for example, although this is our first element, it's actually going to be at the array index, well, the array list index of 0. And similarly, this is the second element, but it'll have an index of 1. And this would have an index of 2. And so that's quite useful for what we're going to look at next, which is if we want to add an element into a specific position in the list. And so I'll do mychars.add, and then I would select this one. And then I would specify the position I want in the list. So I'm going to go for the second index, and I'm going to put in I. And so what that would do is have I put in the second index in the list, or the position of the second index in the list. So here we'd have, this is the 0th, this is the first, and this is the second. And so what it would actually do is, as I becomes the second, O would get shifted back and become the third element in the list. And so let's have a look at how that actually looks. And what I'm going to do is, just to make our life easier, I'm going to define a method to let us print the elements of our array. So I'll use my array list as a parameter, and I'm just going to call it toPrint. And then what I'm going to do is use a for loop as well. And because we start with an index of 0, I will simply start my I from 0. And then, so in an array, we could use the I being less than well, the array name dot length. So here it's quite similar, except it just goes by a different naming convention. So we'll do toPrint, and not length, but we'll actually just do size. And then, of course, we just want to increment I by 1 afterwards. And so let's print that out. And if I just do system.out.println, and here we need to know how to actually reference a specific element in the array. And to do that, all we actually do is toPrint dot and then get, and that will get whatever the index of I is in our array or in our array list. And so if I were to make a call to that, so print my chars and then run that, we would see A, E, I, O comes out. And that's because we have our A, our E, and then our I is being put in the second, well, the position of the second index, and then the O comes out. So that gives us an idea of how to, well, get and add elements, and also to look at the size of our array list. But now, what if we say want to remove an element? Well, again, that's quite intuitive in the way that we would do it, and it's quite similar to how we would add and get, where we do mychars dot, and then we simply remove. And here we just put in the index of the item that we want to remove. So say I want to remove E, then, well, that's at the first index, so I just put a 1 in. And then if we print mychars again, and I'm just going to comment this out so it's clearer, then we can see that E is not in the list, or the array list. But that takes a bit long, and I can actually just clear the whole list if I wanted to. So the way I'll do that is simply mychars.clear, and that will delete everything in our list. So if I was to print mychars again, then I'll be trying to print an empty list, which will obviously just give me nothing. And so that's an introduction to how we would define an array list, as well as how we would use some of the most common methods. But we can also get a predefined array list, and that's where we define it with another collection. So I'm going to define another one here called mychars1, and then I'm going to say a new array list. And what I can actually do is just put in another collection into it, into the brackets here, and then what would happen is mychars1 will now be a copy of mychars, and it will have the same elements that mychars did. And so that's an introduction to array lists in Java. And I hope you found the content useful, and if you have, please do like, share, and subscribe. And of course, all the code will be posted in my Git repository, which will be in the link in the description below. Other than that, in the meantime, feel free to check out my channel for more Java tutorials.